Hello. This video will be a beginner's guide on how to play the King's Gambit opening with the white pieces. I included chapters and timestamps in the description with the various variations that will be covered in this video. And I also included the percentage of time various moves were played by Black online according to the Lichess database up until the 1800 ELO. So you can feel free to skip around according to what moves you want to study more in depth. I want to add a disclaimer that I cannot possibly cover every single variation that Black can try in the scope of this beginner video. One, because it would take too long, and two, it would be just completely unrealistic to be able to memorize all of it. Really, what I'm trying to do is just cover the main variations that Black can try, and a lot of the main ideas that you should play as white, so you can kind of develop the patterns of where we want to develop the pieces and what the different game plans can be. So why should you play the King's Gambit? The King's Gambit opening is extremely aggressive and can lead to very early checkmating positions. It's also very likely to catch the player with the black pieces off guard as early as move 2. According to the Lichess database, a player playing black with e5 is only going to encounter the King's Gambit in about 6% of games. Whereas if you're playing the King's Gambit against e5 all the time, you're extremely likely to be better prepared than your opponent. Because it's so aggressive, you have to be willing to take a lot of risk to play this opening. It's very double-edged, and one mistake by either side can lead to an early checkmate or loss of material. So if you're a player who is very solid and doesn't want to take big risks, this is maybe not the best opening choice for you. However, if you're playing in a bullet or blitz game and want an opening which puts a lot of pressure on Black to make right moves in a low amount of time, then the King's Gambit is an excellent choice for that. The King's Gambit opening begins after e4, e5, and then white playing f4 on move 2, with the idea being that we want to gambit our f-pawn to be able to move this e-pawn off the center so that we can then play the move d4 eventually and have two center pawns. This also gives us a chance to get a lead in development because Black has to move the same pawn twice in the opening. So we get a long-term compensation in terms of more center pawns and a lead in development. The developing ideas for white will be very, very simple and straightforward and repeatable, whereas Black has the pressure to have to defend very, very accurately to be able to hold an even position. The first variation I'm going to be taking a look at is if Black actually tries to decline the gambit. This is actually not the best try for Black. According to theory, the best try is to accept. So if Black declines the gambit, our game plan is going to be very straightforward for white. First, like I said, first we need to prevent this queen h4 check from coming in with the move knight to f3. And then if Black again tries to defend this pawn further with d6, the square we're almost always going to be developing our bishop is onto c4 to put pressure on the f-pawn. And then once we castle with Black, our rook is going to have this f-file where if we so choose, we can exchange this pawn to open up the file and maybe start getting attacks going like this. To look a little bit further at the variation, Black can try to pin our knight to the queen. And here I recommend playing the move h3. If Black tries to maintain this pin, this move is actually a blunder. If you'd like to know why, you can check out my 4 traps in the King's Gambit video. So Black is almost forced to trade this bishop for the knight. And then after this knight moves in, kind of tricky move to remember is actually this queen d3 idea, because the idea is that we want to play after c3, we potentially want to be able to trade the queen off and get a favorable endgame. If you want to see more about this, you can look at the analysis that I put in the description of this video. But the main ideas of this opening are going to be, we want to develop the knight to f3, bishop to c4, castle, eventually open the f-file, maybe move the queen there as well, and very early on start attacking black's king. So this covers some of the main ideas of the declined variation. A rare sideline where you have to remember at least two moves of is if black plays the move d5 right away, trying to counter gambit a pawn. Now, you have to remember that you cannot play f takes e5 here, because this blunders into queen h4 check, double attacking the king and the e-pawn. Instead, you have to remember this move, e takes d5. And then the best try by black is to play e4. Here, the move I recommend is to play d3 immediately to try to put pressure on this pawn again. Black can try capturing here. And then the main game plan for white is that you're just going to keep trying to put pressure on this pawn to maintain center. So you can develop your knight to c3 naturally to put pressure on the queen and on this pawn. Black can try pinning, and you can unpin. Say after trading and a normal move, you can trade. And this is just an example position of how it can play out. But really, again, this is a rare sideline, so the moves I would just memorize for here is e takes d5, and then d3 right away. This is the line I would recommend against the Falkbeer Countergambit. Now we're going to look at variations where black actually accepts the gambit by playing e takes f4. Remembering we want to prevent this queen h4 check, we're going to play knight to f3. And then the first variation we're going to be taking a look at is the most popular move online, knight to c6, known as the MacLeod Defense, which is actually a slight inaccuracy, which leads to a slightly favorable position for white. Here, the move we have to consider is, can we play d4? And in this case, the answer to that is yes, we can play d4, because knight to c6 doesn't really prevent us from playing that move. And after d4, the best move from black that they can try is d5, otherwise they're just kind of giving us the center for free. If they play the move d5 here, we got to remember that we want to exchange the pawn, and once the queen comes out, we can actually develop with a tempo by attacking it with our knight. A lot of players will try to give this check with the queen. You want to just block with the bishop, and then you're already ready to castle. And we actually have this threat of a fork coming up. And already the position is very favorable for white, because black spent two moves moving their queen, wasted a turn taking this pawn, which we're already ready to recapture. And white already has a very favorable position right out of the opening. But the main idea we got to remember for this is if they play knight to c6, we can pretty freely just take the center right away with d4. And this is probably going to be one of the most common variations you're going to get out of the king's opening if you play it online in Blitz, Bullet, or Rapid. The next variation we're going to take a look at after black accepts the gambit is known as the Fischer Defense after pawn to d6. Here, the same question as before. This move gives us free rein to take the d4 square immediately. So we can play d4. A lot of players online are going to try to pin the knight. But here we can actually already just win back our material with bishop takes f4. And after takes, knight f6, say bishop c4. White already has a big lead in development, a big center, and things are already plus over minus for white. So really, it's similar as before. The main idea is just putting the knight on f6, or on f3, sorry, playing d4 when we can, putting our bishop on c4 when we can, and once we castle kingside, our rook is going to have an open file on this f-pawn, and we can get an attack going very early on after, for example, a position such as this, where our queen and rook are lined up on this f-pawn. We could potentially play e5 at some point, and we can get an attack going very, very early on against black, given this opening. Another way that black can try playing after accepting the gambit is to try holding on to their f-pawn by playing the move g5, defending their f-pawn right away. And here the move I recommend playing is h4 to immediately attack the g-pawn. Now many players online will play the natural looking move pawn to f6 in order to defend the g-pawn, but this is actually a huge blunder. And if you'd like to know why, you can check out my 4 traps in the King's Gambit video. But more naturally, black will try to push and play g4, attacking the knight, to where you can move knight to e5. Example variation that can continue is if after d6, attacking our knight, we can capture this pawn on g4, and after takes, say knight f6, attacking our queen and pawn, we can actually just win this f-pawn with our queen. And it's a double-edged position where it's equal according to the engine, but white has a pawn up out of the opening. And this is how I recommend playing against the very immediate g5, where if you study this more than your opponent, you're very likely to have a better position because it's unlikely that black will know the theory as well as white does if white plays the King's Gambit more. The next variation that black can try playing after accepting the gambit is known as the Schallop Defense with knights as f6, immediately trying to attack our e-pawn. And here the move I recommend playing is to defend the pawn by actually pushing it and counterattacking on his knight. Most commonly online, players are going to just move the knight closer into the center, where we can then just freely play the move d4 and taking a big center. The best try from black is to put pressure on our e-pawn, but we can just continue with our normal developing plan, putting our bishop on c4, attacking the knight, castling at some point, possibly recapturing this pawn, developing the knight, and it's a very straightforward plan for white, and we already have an advantage in development. So this is a pretty straightforward opening to play against with white if black is not super prepared. And that's it for this beginner guide. This video should hopefully be a great starting point, as well as maybe a beginner repertoire for playing the King's Gambit. If you want me to make more King's Gambit videos in the future, let me know in the comments or by subscribing. I'm planning on making a video on some of the most famous games ever played in the King's Gambit, so you can see how some of the most famous smackdowns happened in the King's Gambit. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for your time. Take care and good luck in your future games.